got a final approval as submitted. Item D, 203 Ladera Street, got a final approval as submitted. Item E, 501 East Gutierrez Street, got a final approval as submitted for the architecture, and the landscaping was continued to our next consent meeting on January the 3rd. Item F, 1950 Cliff Drive, got a final approval with a condition for the architecture, and final approval is submitted for landscaping. Today's consent calendar was reviewed by Paul Zink and Chris Gilroy.
Great. Thank you. All those in agreement with December 12 minutes review, please say aye. Aye. Against and abstentions? Motion carries. Thank you. That brings us to announcements, requests by applicants for continuances and withdrawals, future agenda items and appeals.
Mr. Chair, staff has an announcement. As I indicated to you last meeting, this is Chair Manson-Hing's last meeting, and we have a little cake for you to celebrate your last meeting. We are all saddened by the fact that you will no longer be the chair, that we look forward to working with you in the future, and on behalf of all our city workers, we've enjoyed working with you. Thank you.
Thanks, Hamid. Touch, I'd like, sorry? Well, I'd first like to say thanks very much. I've thoroughly enjoyed my appointment here, and I particularly feel that way because I felt like I had the support of staff and especially my fellow board members. Just really made it comfortable for me, and I really appreciate being on the board with my fellow board members. Thank you.
Great. So we have some appointments that council will act on tomorrow, and we will place nominations for new chair on for your first meeting in January.
Righto, you guys, right? I'll watch you guys on TV. Okay.
I have an announcement. I have to step down for item 2.
Okay, Chris.
I also will be stepping down for item 2.
Okay. Gary. Okay. Jaime just left. And just on announcements on that would be the next item. So that brings us to item E, subcommittee reports. And I think we have, we just like to report, both Dawn and myself attended a small subcommittee for architectural details, which are details that are happening more and more and coming into question about like clay tile roofs and what the specification is when we ask for two-piece tile, chimney heads and that sort of stuff. And Dawn stepped in as she will be continuing on the board, and maybe as things develop, I think what it is the city is trying to come to put together some sort of common details that are going to be acceptable by everyone on things like handrails and the specification for clay tile roofs and chimney eaves. And I guess Dawn will then be able to keep you abreast of the progress on that subcommittee. Okay? Anything you want to add, Dawn? Okay, that brings us to the end of general business. And now our first item of the evening, 500 Fowler Road. Hello, Karen.
Hi.
How are you doing? Congratulations on your new terminal.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Yep.
There you go. Just press the middle. There you go. You're on. Right. Excellent.
Good afternoon. I'm Leif Reynolds, project engineer with the airport.
Karen Ramsdale, Airport Director.
Thanks. Could you just turn the mic towards you?
Sure.
Yeah. This one you can leave and then point the head, the microphone. Yeah. Go ahead.
There we go.
You're good to go. Right.
Okay, so we're here to talk about the emergency generator at the new airline terminal. And we're here because in a site visit that took place for the T-Hangar project, it was noted that the generator was on the air side and could be seen, from the air side of the terminal. And there was a question that was posed to staff if the generator had been reviewed and approved as part of the airline terminal project. And so we're here today to explain to you the review process that took place for the project and the generator, and just to go through it and to go through the photos that we took and presented to see if you have questions after that. So the first drawings that I submitted were just AS 1.1. That's just our architectural site plan, and E 2.0. And both of those drawings showed the electrical service yard in plan view. There were no drawings of the electrical service yard in elevation view that were presented to the ABR or the subcommittee during the design review process that we know of. It was shown, it was pretty much to scale on these drawings, and our recollection is during the design subcommittee reviews, we discussed the air side versus the street side of the airline terminal, and it was decided that the air side was more of a industrial type look, and so we were fine with the generator as well as the other pieces of equipment in the electrical service yard as proposed. So that's our recollection in a nutshell of the process. And then what I did is I took several photos of the generator pretty much from most of the vantage points in the airfield. I think we all have kind of the same order, but it'll be hard to follow because there's so many of them. But the first photo I took was just simply the best view of the electrical service yard, and that shows the generator and all of our automatic transfer switches. That photo was taken from inside the electrical service yard. So unless you could see over the gate, which is probably 10 feet tall, it'd be hard to get that view from the street. I was inside the gate looking right at it. The next view, which is the best view of the generator and the mufflers, is that from Jet Bridge 1 view from the top. And the jet bridges, as you all recall, have a fixed portion and then two portions that extend. And so what I did is I took a photo from Jet Bridge 1 right from the top, and obviously that's right where it connects to the terminal building. Then I took a photo a little bit further down from the midsection, which obviously is looking a little bit more to the east. And then finally I was at the bottom of the jet bridge, and I took a photo looking back that would be straight, pretty much due east at it at that point. I then I went to the second floor inside the airline terminal, and as you all know, we have the one main window that looks south, and I took a photo from that window. That photo shows if you're looking straight at the window, you can't see the generator. However, what I did then is I went as far to the side of that window as I could, and you can see that in the southwest view, second floor, and I leaned over and I snapped a photo looking to the west, and you can see that from that angle you can see one of the mufflers and about half of the generator. So I think the main issue of view for this generator is definitely from the jet bridge. It's not from the terminal itself. Then I just pretty much started at the south end of the terminal on the second floor. I took a photo from Gate 1. That's the Gate 1 view, and that's just looking kind of southwest. You can see a portion of the generator. And then as I go further to the north, of course you can't see it at all. There's the Gate 2 door view, the Gate 2 view, which is a little bit bigger. And all these views are fairly typical. You can see the jet bridges and miscellaneous equipment out on the ramp that moves around. The Gate 3 view, which shows, jet bridge number 4, or lights, various airline equipment. Gate 4 view, which shows pretty much the same thing. And then I also took a photo from the patio, exterior first floor patio, looking south to see if you could see it from there. And you can't really see it from there. As you can see from that photo, you're really looking at 2 jet bridges from that location. So you really would have to know exactly where to look, and it's very hard to pick it out from the jet bridges from that view. So I took those photos, and then I also, I've been going over it with Karen to determine if there was something we could do, to screen this generator and the mufflers at this time. And after we took the photos, we really realized that the main view corridor is from jet bridge number 1. It's not from the terminal itself. If we were to erect some type of screen for the generator or the mufflers, clearly it would block the view to the south more so than the view we have right now. And so I and the airport are not sure that we would want to propose anything like that, because we feel it would probably block the view further from that jet bridge 1. We've looked into the possibility of painting out the mufflers. They are obviously a high temperature exhaust silencer. Not sure from the manufacturer if we can paint those or not, but we are looking into that. There is also a possibility of erecting a type of shield around the mufflers, and we're looking into that from the manufacturer as well. I'm not sure how much bigger than the mufflers that would be, but there are other generators that have a type of shield just around the mufflers, and that would match the color of the enclosure that the generator's in right now. So that's kind of in a nutshell the review process that took place, the photos. I've tried to capture for you how you can see it the best from the airline terminal building, and I just wanted to go to you at this time to ask if you have any questions from us. We, the airport, certainly never tried to hide the generator from view. It's just that it's a piece of equipment, and I don't believe it was actively reviewed in terms of the size during the design process. And that's, I think, why we're here today.
Thank you. Okay, with that, I'd like to open it up for public comment, and anyone in the audience would like to come forward, seeing no one. Would you like to comment on this on the airport? If you'd like to, can you come forward, please?
Excuse me, I just can't hear.
Would you like to comment on this airport application?
No, I just want to go forward so I can hear audibly, but I have no comments.
Okay, thank you. I just close that portion, bring it back to the board for questions. Paul?
No questions.
Keith?
No questions.
Don? Gary?
Yeah, when you were mentioning about painting the mufflers, is there a reason why you didn't mention painting the shrouding around the outside?
There is. The shrouding is I can't recall the name of the paint application, but it's once it's painted, it's not just painted, it's I can't recall it as soon as it's
Powder coated?
yes, powder coated. So once you powder coat something, you've kind of lost your opportunity to paint it again.
No further questions.
Bruce? Nothing to say.
Well, actually, I do have one more question. Is there any particular reason why this electrical pad unit, this whole area with the disconnects and so forth, wasn't put behind some type of screen wall? Is there a safety concern, or is there some reason why this wasn't put into a mechanical well or a screen wall around these units, like most?
Not to my knowledge. I believe that during the review process, it was discussed that the electrical service yard was similar in nature to all of the pieces of airline equipment that are on the ramp as well. And so, being that it was more of an industrial look on the air side, it simply wasn't required. I don't think there's a reason one wasn't put up, but that's my understanding of the review process and why one wasn't requested.
Okay.
I guess I do have a question. Is it finished, Gary?
Yes, I'm done.
You said this powder coating finish, you have investigated that it cannot be painted?
That's right, correct. Whereas the mufflers are a different paint application, it's a high heat type paint, and I think they can, but I just haven't got from the manufacturer an absolute that they could be.
I think the other option that you looked at was a cover that goes over the top of the exhaust.
Right, a shroud that goes over the mufflers. And the manufacturer of the generator can supply and install those types of covers if desired. I don't know exactly what it would look like for ours because we haven't investigated that thoroughly, but that can be done. It has been done on other generators, I understand.
Okay. I bring it back to the board for comments. Paul?
This is a shame that this fell through the cracks. When Cottage Hospital was being built and they used a local architect up to a certain point, and then the drawings were done by somebody else who does hospitals, things like this were reviewed and somehow it didn't fall through the cracks. But in this case it did fall through the cracks, and it's something that should have been reviewed. Because of Santa Barbara, we really care about our views, that I think we need to do something as a city, and that is to build an enclosure around it or to seriously look at opportunities of relocating it to one side or another. You pointed out that it slipped through the cracks, that's fine, but what's there right now is unacceptable in the sense of how hard we work to try to make buildings beautiful, and leaving it there will only point to other businesses saying, well, the city got to do this at the airport, so why can't I? And then we have that argument. So I would encourage another look at some options of putting a shroud not only around the muffler itself, but around the building itself, because if it's a CMU block with a little crown molding or something, a little top molding, that is more visually appealing to look at versus this thing which is not appealing and it's so huge. Or if it was to be relocated, what are your options? But what's there right now, it's a shame it happened.
Thanks, Paul. Keith?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think I tend to agree with Paul's comments. I would like to see some options for potentially screening it, and then what any kind of shroud or additional, components could be added that would kind of help screen the equipment. So I would like to see some options.
Thank you. John?
Yeah, I was just wondering if you've pursued the furthest extent of the ability to re-powder coat the outside, like sandblasted and re-powder coat. I mean, I seem to remember having situations where the powder coat of something has been compromised and then going back and re-powder coating things. So have you gotten a definite, there's no possible way you can, it just seems like that would be the easiest way, and if it was white, it would just blend.
That's something that we can look further into. The manufacturer of the generator enclosure is different from the manufacturer of the generator, as well as the manufacturer of the mufflers. So it's difficult to get an answer from the party that makes, a part of the equipment as a whole. But we can further look into re-powder coating the enclosure a different color.
For me, I think that it would just go away. But I'm just one person.
And are you thinking matching the mufflers and the enclosure with one color?
Well, I think that if you painted the surround white instead of having it beige, then everything might just disappear. If you can't paint the mufflers, then so be it. Maybe you could put a metal piece around the
Right.
mufflers that it's powder coated the same color.
Right, paint it white or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. But I just think that anything you put around it is just going to make the whole thing, like you say, bigger and more obtrusive, and so just that would be an interesting exercise to
And
see
we
if
can
you
look
could do
further
that.
into that. We will.
Yeah, that's my comment, Mr. Chair.
Thanks, Don. Gary? Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that we did not catch this. I know there was a lot to look at this time, and I don't recall having a discussion, period, about this equipment area on the project as a whole. I see it as a problem. Almost every emergency generator I see has got a shroud around it. It's in an equipment well. Same thing if it was a chiller area or if it was a pump area. Even our transformers that you have here, we usually put a small shroud around a transformer. We hide our backflow devices because we don't want to see our backflow devices. And to have equipment of this size that is just opened and has a see-through chain link fence with double barbed wire on both sides, I don't think that's acceptable. I don't think we would let any other corporation or building do such a project where this is exposed to that. And I really feel that even if you painted it a different color, it's going to be unacceptable. I would say that the switchgear and the transformer and all of that should be enclosed inside a mechanical well area that is either CMU or plaster wall, but something that is hard, something that's going to shield some of the noise from it, if it ever is run, but mostly shield view from the public. And I think that it should have, I would agree with Paul and Keith that it should be a shield around around this generation area.
Thanks, Gary. Chris?
I don't have much to add, but I do agree with basically everyone that's spoken thus far, and that's if it can't be painted a different color, then I think there needs to be some kind of enclosure. Although, again, going back to what you said, that does run the risk of making the seam that much more massive. But I think that's better than staring at this thing. I mean, if you look at the pictured Jet Bridge 1 view from top, right over the top of those mufflers is that gorgeous view of the islands. So hopefully, if there is an enclosure, it wouldn't block that view. But it's I think you just need to explore options further.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks, Chris. I agree with all the other members. I'd start off and say, I think it's totally regrettable that we are here at this stage now, looking at this after it's been put in place. I think all the efforts the subcommittee had, just as Paul was saying, to make the building what it is, and to end up with having this where it is like this without having been reviewed, I think it's really, really regrettable. My fears about what action you may take now to enclose this area is that so far my experience with these huge generators are that if you see all those doors on the casement all around, they all require a certain clearance away from these doors to be, and when this generator does click on, all of these louvers open up, and they're required to have clear air coming and going and stuff like that, and it's all this technical stuff that is required for it. So I fear that the enclosure may get very big. But I think that something needs to be done, and it can't stay the way it is. At minimum, I would agree with Dawn that we should talk to the housing manufacturer and and see if that could either be repainted or the housing itself can be changed to one where they supply it in a different color. I think that these other switch panels down here seem to blend into the concrete area when you look down on it a lot better than this does, and I would ask you to look at one of these colors here that might be a candidate as a color to look at. And I agree that, when you look down from anywhere in the building and you look out on a chain link fence with barbed wire on top, it just seems that it's a part of the airport that is to be corrected, or it's a temporary situation that we're going to make right. But it hardly feels that this is an airport that we just built, to have this stature. And that's why it feels so bad to have this there. And so I think all the solutions that we have talked about, I would really support pursuing them to see what can be done. But it is a considerable aesthetic impact in my view. Okay.
Mr. Chair,
Sorry.
I have one more, comment or question. I'm wondering if you've explored the possibility of relocating the mufflers anywhere down on the side of this element, or if those have to be right on top like that.
We have not explored that at this time. It's something we can explore.
Okay, then I'll turn into a comment then. I would explore that.
Just one quick question for you, especially since this is your last meeting.
Yes.
And I believe you're the only ABR member who was on the ABR subcommittee for the terminal building. And wondering if you recall any discussion about not reviewing details of items on the airfield side of the terminal, because it's just part of their airport operations, and it didn't need to be scrutinized that much as the public front side of the terminal.
I don't recall that. I don't recall that specifically coming across that. First, I don't recall that we reviewed this unit where it is, and I don't recall that there were certain items in the airport review that were exempted or aside from the building itself. That was not something that we were going to look at. I don't clearly have a recollection that ever came to pass. Maybe it did, but it's not something that I recall at all. I know that at one time, one of the things, for instance, that we were really concerned about was there was a roof element over the first floor to the front of the building that had all of these air conditioning units. And when we found out about them, that these units would be there, they told how big these units were, and we had to ask. And then when we found out how big they were much bigger than anybody really imagined. I believe that in the end, the architects had to raise the screen panel that was designed for in front of it. So it's things like that I would have hoped that the architects doing it would have been well aware that these things come back and they bite us when we don't follow up on these pieces of equipment. And I would have thought that if they knew anything about it at all, that they would have brought it to our attention. But I really don't recall that things were exempt, from our review. It was just never presented to us that was going to exist there. That's my feel.
Apparently there was, I don't recall specifically either, but there are other people who were at the meetings that did recall.
Yeah.
But not that this is a picture of the generator or the electrical yard, but more of a general conversation about equipment on the air side. And like I said, I don't recall the details either, so.
Yeah.
I think we are where we are, and
Yeah.
we got to deal with.
And it
this.
might well have, and I just never,
Well.
it didn't stick with me, so something
But
like that.
there were no, I mean, I was surprised also when I looked outside and saw how big it was. I think we all were.
Yeah.
But anyway, I think we have to deal with it now. And
Yeah. Okay, with Tony, you had any other questions? Oh, okay. With that, board is open to a motion. With those investigative work, we'd like to ask before we make the motion, how much time you think you might have before wanting to come back and present anything, and then we just.
later January. Yeah, because we're off on furlough
Oh, I see.
in
Right.
December.
So Tony, would that be?
January 9th and
The 23rd.
So would that constitute indefinite? Oh.
January 23rd? Does that work?
Okay.
Continue it to January 23rd?
To continue to January 23rd.
Or we could say indefinitely, and we can just schedule whichever you prefer.
You know the dates, and you could make the application.
Sure.
Sure. Okay.
Let's do it that way.
All right. So it'd be an indefinite continuance back to full board on the item. Can I have someone wants to make a motion to?
You want to vote one?
I'll make a motion for
Here goes.
continuance for the applicant to return with let's just options for screening the generator and muffler. And then I don't think we need to go into specifics necessarily because we've given you some options that might work. Is that sufficient, just that as a motion?
It could be. Let's get a second.
Okay.
And then we could polish it if we need to. You have a second?
I'll second the motion.
Second by Keith, under discussion. Keith, if you have any as a seconder.
I would just say, in addition to the screening options, to visually blend the equipment into the surroundings. So that could also take into account the color and things like that.
Okay, with that, all those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Against? Abstention? Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Oh, sorry. Provide additional scale giving elements to the street facade. Consider material usage and placement to add further articulation of the facade and further breakup of the three-story planes of the west elevation. Okay, stay tuned. Proceed.
Mark Whitkey, the architect, and Chuck McClure here. Talk about landscaping. These are both the same set. One is in color with the laser printer, and the other is a halftone set. So I think these actually are easier to read, especially if you're looking at them over a table. So, in no particular order, this first page is basically the front elevation. And one thing I wanted to show about this is the scale of it. it talks about a lot of the overarching parts of this particular site. One is the railroad is adjacent. Then there's a setback area that's being used for a future, it's basically an easement, a 10-foot easement. We're actually adding another 18 inches for landscaping in addition to that. The building podium starts, the soil isn't very good, so it's going to have caissons and grade parking, where all the parking is in this first level, and then the units are above. And behind it, if you remember, there's still, after the podium there's another unit which starts at the grade in the back. All the common outdoor spaces in the back. The 33-foot wide arroyo is an existing condition that's going to be beautified, if you will, in this particular location. So this is basically showing a lot of sycamores and oak trees, and Chuck will get into that, where all the water comes in. It'll actually filter the water through a series of ponds, if you remember the conversation last week, or 2 weeks ago, which is one of the new methods for sustainable bioswale methodology. So that kind of created our 33-foot setback line, where normally we would have encroached part of it and maybe stepped back the building in a certain regard. Here we're basically coming straight up from that edge, which becomes actually a really beautiful, heavily treed environment. So this is actually the new and improved version. It's simplified and also some nicer materials. One is stone, Santa Barbara sandstone is used on the two frontal planes at the grade level. One of them is the kind of entry section, which draws your attention in that corner, which is on axes of the street, to the walk-up steps that take you to the railroad platform, if you will, where all the units enter off of, except for one of the units. Also this section over here, the rest of it is just simple section of stucco, where before it had stopped and broke it in half and created another level of material, which within restudying it, manipulating it, keeping it much simpler seems to be much better. Also plays up the fact of the materials and added a few windows in this section and this section here. This element that starts at this section is basically a datum line. It's a one-story datum line element that comes up over the top and creates a shaded, rainproof or whatever area for the stairway going up. So there's the site again. If I remember, it's on the corner of Figueroa. I'm not sure what this road's called again. I think it's on the next sheet. But it's basically this particular site here. The section in the back is the old Mission Creek, which after it was readjusted, and it's no longer really an operating creek, it's more of a water shed area for some of the drainage. It still has sycamores and other trees. There's a really big sycamore tree in the back, which we're playing into the, you see on this page here, into the arroyo section, and stepping back from the outdoor space for all the units is over here, overlooking the arroyo, overlooking the sycamores. Chuck's plants are sort of slightly implied here, but actually there's a lot more of them. In fact, we're adding plants to the neighbor's property to really beautify the entire arroyo. But that shows the parking and the easement area where we're having a walkway through the side. Through a little more plan check, we're actually having the handicap access come down to this point and enter this far back on the site, because you can't have just access through the parking area. You have to have both. So this bottom unit area here is the handicap unit. It can come in through here, enter, come in through here, and enter. Storage in the back, bike storage, and the outdoor play area, like I mentioned. Nothing's really changed drastically or at all in this section, save for some window elements, which we'll get to in a second. Basically, the platform is here. You enter the 4 units here, the 6th unit here. The lower level is a studio. This level here is a 2-bedroom unit. So on page 7, starting at the top, this was one of the elevations that had probably the most comments on. And so what I did is I readjusted the attitude for each unit, making each individual unit kind of demarcated through a series of break lines where the gutter and the roof element comes out. There's actually a thin colored wall element at that location, and a bay window section that kind of mimics the other part in the back, which no one seemed to have a problem with. So what it really does is it says here's unit 1, 2, 3, and 4. Each one of the units has an outdoor balcony, and the master bedroom area would have an outdoor balcony and a series of windows, which basically are kind of more playful than they were before, which were giant square window openings. And then that's it for that. This was basically the same as it had before, although I have added a few windows on this corner here. We talked about this already, a series of stone elements in the front wall section that continues off past here to block some of the view into the side yard, into the parking. So you can see it here extending out into the front yard setback line. And then the other side is basically the same. You'll see here this is across the walkway. So you'll come through here, enter at this point. There's a glass sound wall because it has to have sound protection. This particular thing draws your attention to the plane that was pulled up and colored also as a roof element to keep the rain out. A stairway that takes you, as you enter the door here, that takes you up to the podium or the deck, the railroad platform deck also. From that point, you can actually enter the other unit. And the other changes that were made on this elevation is instead of using one square window, it's a series of window height units. I think they're 3 feet off the ground. It makes the bedrooms very flexible, but when you walk into these two bedroom areas, there's a great view of the mountains beyond for all units. And this particular unit on the lower level is another bedroom or family room area. It has it's flush. It's not set back. I think what this does is it creates a notched out opening that draws your attention with the canopy also to the entry, and the rest of it is just very simple modular facade element with very simple elements and window penetration. That's kind of the section through the podium and the entry area and the balconies in the back. They're covered with wood slats, so you can't actually see into your neighbor's area. It gives you a sense of privacy and directs all your attention into the arroyo. They also have a little bit area in the front that is a setback for at the entry area where you can also sit out and watch the trains go by if you want to. I think that's it. I think that's pretty much what we talked about. What you talked about? You want to talk about
just
landscaping right away?
Virtually the same as last time.
Can you have any comments about landscaping?
Any comments about the landscaping?
We didn't have any landscaping comments. So,
Did you make any changes?
Yeah.
Okay.
This little pathway used to was meandering, and I just think that was kind of inadequate because it just made for tiny little planter on one side, tiny little planter on the other side. So I just am saying let's just put the walk or the future bike path or whatever it is, your handicap access to the back. Let's just hug the building with that, and that'll let us have a meaningful size planter on this side so that we can have our trees and actually have them do well and less maintenance. And then secondly, I just took the vines off the building, and we have this 8-foot fence that is going to be heavily vined, so that just kind of cleans, lets the building be the building and the landscape be the landscape, and I think that's better for the long-term maintenance. And that's all.
okay. With that, I'd like to open it for public comment. Anyone from the public that would like to comment? Then bring it back to the board. Close public comment. Bring it back to the board for questions. Paul?
No questions.
Keith?
No questions.
Don? Okay. I had a quick question. Some questions, Mark. On the last meeting, we talked about some articulation and what we could do on the street facade, and in particular for me was the little relief between these wall elements and this wall, and giving some kind of relief to that street elevation. And I just wondered if you had given that some thought or consideration of what could be done with that.
I did, and I think adding the stone on these two sections makes these walls thicker. These are in front of the other wall by about a foot, I believe. So they'll act like a planar element that's in front, but with a nicer material makes it even thicker. And then the doors were set back a little further for the driveway, but very minor. I didn't move this facade back anymore, and as you can tell, I didn't undulate the facade at all.
And what is this this element which is at the back wall and then now forward of this wall? And if you're saying this wall is 12 inches in front of that,
Correct, yeah.
so then this being in front of that, what's the depth of that there then? This
This purple or maroon wall?
Yes.
That's like a 2-foot overhang section that creates protection for the door and just an element.
Okay.
The maximum it can stick out.
Let's have a look at that side elevation. Sorry. Okay. All right. With that, bring it back to the board for comments. Paul?
Mark, just a simple question. Is this 5 units or 6 units?
It's 6 now. The lower level is a studio with a 2-bedroom above, whereas before it was a 3-bedroom.
Okay.
Now it's 6 units.
And it used to be a 9-unit project? Sorry about that. Thank you for the changes you make. I'm still uncomfortable with it, mainly because it's a big block. What you designed was originally a 9-unit project, and it had some articulation breaking up the units, and the side elevation that faces the railroad tracks, it does appear like there are 4 distinct elevations with the screed coming down, yet it's still, I want to say, the top of the parapet is all one line, it's all one plane, it's not broken up, and what I want to say, into a cluster of houses. And I understand the need of the way the construction is happening, so that's why the parking the way it is with the platform and the caissons, and you're building up from it. But as I've been driving around town, I look at other housing projects that we have that are multiple units, and they're not built as one big warehouse block, and that's what this was, and it still is. And I'm having difficulty with this type of construction in the neighborhood and where it's located. And the couple examples I can think of is when we did projects on the west side, when someone wants to do a 2-unit project and you were the chair at the time, you didn't want to have a ridge that went from one end to the other end. You wanted us to break the roof into 2 elements because it was a 2-unit project and there was some kind of articulation that happened on the 2nd or the 3rd floor. And I think of a project that was on De La Vina Street, the 800 block, in which the units are broken up and there's a lot more carving out that happens. And this, because you're using the same floor plan from the previous time, you're staying with the form, and the form is very boxy. I mean, it's just one box, and it doesn't have the articulation that I think would be necessary when you say, I'm designing a 5-unit condominium complex on this site, or a 6-unit condominium complex. It is too much like a converted warehouse. So I think the project is not going the right direction for me.
Okay, Paul, Keith?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Excuse me. Well, I think the moves you made are definitely improvements. It's not quite as linear feeling and singular kind of in form as it was before. I think I'd still like to see some further articulation, particularly the street facade. I mean, I think the addition of the stone and everything's a good breakup, but I still feel the upper floors need a little more in and out, because essentially we have a 3-story wall there that has needs more articulation, I think. On the railroad side, again, I think a little more articulation, perhaps some more canopies. I think, as Paul was suggesting, some variation in the parapets or roof line, so that we're not so uniform and just one continuous line. I think the ribbon windows are maybe a little too kind of Walter Gropius for me or something. It's just looking a little too modern. I don't know, maybe look at like like Irving Guild, Dodge House, kind of how those are broken up a little more, maybe recessed or something, but I think those are a little too modern in character. And on the Arroyo side, I think just, again, a little more articulation. Maybe there's some awnings or a trellis or two or something that gives it a little more shadow, because, again, you've got this virtually this 3-story wall. I think the stone base starts to help to break it up, but I think it needs a little more. So I think it's an improvement. I think there's still some ground to go just with articulation and a little more three-dimensional variation to sort of counteract the overall mass and the kind of boxy massing.
Thanks, Keith. Dawn?
I'm digressing back to a question. That is, what is the dimension of the break, the recess between the units on the Arroyo side?
This
Yeah,
purple
the
line, it's
centimeter. It looks like about 4 inches.
6 inches, 4 inches, yeah.
And it's about 4 inches deep.
Yeah.
And then the other thing I noticed was you said that the stone wall was in front of the plane of the unit, but is that just a drafting error? Because
No, it might not be that far in front now.
it looks like the same plane now.
Yeah.
That looks like the wall. The front of the face is in line of the plane of the stucco on that elevation. I think it might just be a drafting error. But
I think it's just a little bit in front.
so it's not even the 12 inches in front.
I think the
Okay.
wall was 12 inches thick, but I think when it's attached to the 8-inch wall, it's only
I think
4
it needs
inches
to be the thickness of the wall. So now I'm in the comments. I think it needs to be the thickness of the wall at a very minimum. I think that the red kind of element that runs vertically and horizontally through that elevation, I can understand why you didn't want to make it too deep, and it looks like you said it's about 2 feet deep over the garage door, which if the sandstone wall were in front of it, it makes it only a foot then. But maybe one thing that's not helping it is the fact that you're going vertical with it, and then that's why you're keeping it back. If it were horizontal, it could actually serve as a rain cover, because right now it can't serve as one. More like what you've done over the entryways, where you've actually pulled the element out and it actually serves a purpose. I would like that more, and to me it would give you more three-dimensionality to the front elevation. Even though I like what you've done with that whole element kind of continuing around, but I think it's not serving you in a great way to break up those planes, those vertical planes. I think that the separation of the units from the Arroyo side could be a little wider, but I think the shadow line to me is enough to create the separation and a change in color or materiality. So those are my 2 comments. I think that everything else you've done, I like what you've done, and like I said, I think that just the shadow line between the units is enough for me, and the fact that you've taken away that big overhang that was way up here, brought the balconies back in. I don't have a problem with the window breakups on the front side. I kind of like the modernist look. So those are my comments.
Mr. Chair, before you comment, I'd like to also bring to the board's attention, which I think I brought last time, but when this project was first approved and went to Planning Commission before, it was approved by the board basically as the same mass. In fact, when no one had any problem with this section last week and liked, quote unquote, what we had done before, which is similar to this thing, our client thought that, hey, that's a good direction, let's go back to that direction, which is already approved. And it seems hard for the client to come in and say, well, we already got this approved before from the Board of Architectural Review in addition to the Planning Commission with certain things. I mean, part of that was, we'll keep the thing 33 feet back, but we need to also start our podium here. We need to have the design look like such and such, which is this, which is not a very deep section, as you notice, in the other direction for the studio side. So it's kind of like catching them off guard where we kind of were allowed to do certain things and got approval within the economy, that those things collapse, and now it's sounding kind of like, no, this is not as good as it was before, or it's too bulky. And I don't want that. If that's what I'm hearing, I want that to be acknowledged, because my client sitting behind us is going to be concerned that there's an inconsistency from that direction, from the same architectural board review. That's it.
Okay. Well, I'd like to, address that first. And it had a previous approval. I agree, and it was passed then. It has since expired. Having to come back before the board, I think that the client can't expect that it's not going to be really reviewed again, per se, and that it would just be a rubber stamp of the previous approval. But I see what you're getting at, is you're thinking about in the broad sense of what the project is, you're feeling that should be adhered to. Yeah, I agree with that in many ways, but at the same time, I think that there are, as you review this couple of years later, there are other things that time passes and people's opinion of what constitutes compatibility at that time may not be exactly the same that is compatibility at this time. Just because time has passed and the situations in the neighborhood and the feel of the city might it evolves. And so I think that what I'm hoping, what we're trying to do here on the board here is we're trying to address that subtle involvement that has happened during that time, and just trying to bring that to the fore. I think that at the time we really pushed this project to make as much of that lot, which was a very difficult lot to start with, and we were trying to get as many units into that. So I don't want to compare the two too much. I really just want to just make this as good as it could be without trying to redesign the whole thing. My feeling about the project then and now, to some extent, was always more concerned with the street elevation here, and the success of the street elevation. And it was a lot harder to manipulate this with the 10 units when this was a whole unit right in here. And I think that this plays a part in my thinking is that you now have these very, very large units, and I think that gives you a little bit more freedom to be able to work this elevation a little bit more. I think the moves that you have made in defining these units are very good moves from the last issue that you had. But one of the things that had come out of the design, I find, is that because all of these elements are all flush, and these are all flush here, the building, to me, takes on a little bit more of a tilt-up feeling, where it's more of a flat plane that you have glazing flushed with it, and then you pop out a very large unit. So I have some sympathies where like for instance, what Keith was saying about the styling and these all being flat, and the way it feels more of a flat, plain, rectangular box then, and that's so I'm kind of in that. I am in that mode that I see some massaging that could make this mass and scale a little bit better. And I'm really more concerned more about that elevation and the street elevation and how it modulates. With Dawn's look at this thing here, knowing that this thing is even very, very close to that. I think it takes away from this visual even that you just don't have the depth that that this plane should have, or could have too. So I don't want to beat it anymore. I think that your divisions are working, but I really think that it needs just a little bit more massaging to make the building a little softer, artistically or aesthetically. So I'm not too worried about the overall project. I think that where the siding is and the size of it and the height of it, all of that is good. But the edges of it, as it makes the pedestrian and street level, I think that those are the little things to me that I think could be looked at now again. So that's just the way I feel.
I'd also like some clarification on the word articulation, because I've heard it used a couple of different times, but sometimes it seems to be referred to moving windows in a more fanciful way, and other times I'm almost getting the impression like you want the wall moved back. And if it's a wedding cake kind of effect, I'd rather refer to as that. If an articulation, maybe taking the facade and articulating it in different ways, like the bay windows and where the placement of the fenestration is at. That's how I'm responding to that word articulation. So.
Sure. When I was saying articulation, I was seeing more a change in wall plane. So yes,
Greater
moving
depth.
walls, greater depth, some variation.
I would concur with that, and where I would point that out is you've got these voids here, and we all don't like doing a deck over living space, exterior decks, but you can push that area back and create some undulation that happens in the elevation because you push the upper floor back. Then by carving this out, then you're carving this area out, which then softens what basically is a 3-story flush elevation to the street. So that's where I'm saying is that you need to cut this thing into 5 or 6 buildings versus one monolithic wedge.
Yeah, and I concur with Keith with the modulation. If you want to get an answer on that, I think his articulation of what we're trying to achieve there is, I concur with that. I'm not that, in terms of the buildings being divided into different blocks, I'm not as strong as Paul on that particular part, mostly because of the previous project, the way we handled the previous project. But I would like to see that push and pull of the planes a little bit, that gives it that softness, a little bit more shadow, real shadow, you know.
Mr. Chair, if I might, just to give an example of that, Mark, I mean, the end unit floor plan is exactly this, that's facing the street is exactly the same as all the mid-building plans, and clearly there's, for the size of the rooms, there is some opportunity for further change in planes and things like that. So I think that's just an example.
Mr. Chair, where I'm coming from mainly is before we had a 9-unit project, and a 9-unit project had so many required parking spaces, so much outdoor living space, and then the project was designed thus. That approved that mass. Now we're a 5-unit project, and sure, there's nothing saying he can't have 24 square foot units up there, but there is an opportunity to further refine the building into different articulations and not go with the same 9-unit solution that he had.
Yeah. Given that, I would like to respect the considerable amount of work that has been done on the past in the project in terms of how much we've reviewed it. So I'm not saying that we want this thing redesigned, the project, because to me that's not what I'm thinking about at all. As a whole project, I don't want it redesigned. I just want it looked in the light of what our members have said here, to have some further articulation that can get out of this mass that we have here, this little bit of softness that we're trying to bring into the project. That's more my feel on it. Okay, so I'm open to a motion.
Mr. Chair, I'll take a stab at it. Mark, would you want to come back to the 3rd, I believe, is our next? No, not not the 3rd. 9th is our next meeting, or? Sure. Okay. So this would be a continuance back to full board. The next meeting, January 9th, with the following comments. The board appreciates the changes made from the previous scheme. However, the board would request further articulation of the architectural forms, including changes in wall plane to provide variation and articulation to the building mass. Applicants pay particular concern to the street facade and adding further three-dimensional massing and articulation to soften the three-story plane. Applicants encouraged to study changes in the parapets and roof line to add the additional articulation.
Okay. Thanks, Keith. Can I have a second on that?
I'll second that.
Oh, okay. Under discussion. All those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Abstentions? Motion carries.
Making progress, no against. Thank you.
Okay, Mark. Thanks.
Yeah, you want to keep that?
Just let me pick one.
Excellent.
That looks good, Mark.
Sorry.
Yeah, that's good.
It's my fault.
You should be proud of that.
I know why you were looking at me.
Looks even better than
I'm a little bit.
People moving around.
yeah, it's really it's so good.
I didn't think the issue necessarily.
I like this. You know, there's a lot going on, but it's simple. You know, and that's what I like about it. It's not overwrought.
Then I realized you
I love the simplicity. Yet it actually feels complex.
Make sure your walls
Yeah.
I forced you to vote for it. You could have voted against it. You could have seconded and voted against it.
Okay, that brings us to item 3, 900 Calle de los Amigos. See Mark. Merry Christmas for those of you. Yeah.
When do we
Okay.
get cake?
I don't know, but we should eat it now. We should all be munching down.
I didn't eat breakfast or lunch.
But now's a good time then. Okay, while you guys set up, if you don't mind, I'm just gonna read it out, just to speed things along here. Back to full board. Comments 1, 4, 5, 6, and 7 from the minutes of 9, 6, 11 are carried forward. Work with neighbors to the north regarding final landscape placement. Study the retaining wall, fence, and berm landscape of the Mesa Verde parking lot area. The wood fence is not needed. Screen with landscaping. Only one trailhead entrance off Torino Drive is encouraged. Study the entry landscape and sign details. Incorporate arborist recommendations and identify locations on the landscape plans. Step back retaining walls adjacent to pedestrian sidewalks to provide planting pockets. Provide a site campus lighting plan with fixture cut sheets. And consider providing photometrics. Study the porch columns and provide details for architectural character. Okay. Yes, please state your name and proceed.
I guess I'm going to be leading this presentation, at least for the moment.
Okay.
I'm David Black, landscape architect, Justin Dunwellum, architect Bond Design, and Mike Cassesi with Mac Design on the right.
Mike.
Civil engineer. I thought we would begin with the landscape plan. One, because you haven't seen it yet, and two, it's sort of reflective of some of the issues around grading. And so we'll look at some of the walls and give you a sense of what they would look like. The campus is large and widespread, and so it's actually a series of landscape solutions all over the place. I know that for the neighbors at Hidden Oaks, the areas that are of most interest to them are the ones that are immediately adjacent to their properties. I will point out that a couple things. One is that I did meet with the representatives of the Hidden Oaks. I think we had a nice discussion. I tried to make clear what it was that we were proposing, and I obviously heard their concerns. And actually, what came out of it, really for me anyway, was that, and what I told them was a commitment on our part, our meaning me and Valverde, to make any and every attempt to, adjust the landscape as the project comes up out of the ground to meet their needs, because they have needs for screening, they have needs for maintaining view corridors, which are not altogether clear when you're on the site now because you don't have the benefit of the structures coming up. But I made it clear that when we got to that point that, they could feel free to work with us in the field in terms of adjusting the locations of plant materials and what have you. So I hope that they came away with it feeling more comfortable than they were before we met. I also would point out, too, that that we met with Ann Marks of the City Fire Department, which is a requirement for these kinds of projects, and she's essentially signed off on the drawing. So that being said, I want to give you a little bit of an overview, just relative to the areas that on the west side, or north and west side, that is adjacent to this woodland area. And you've actually already seen these plans. We're not asking for any approval because approval has already been given to this, but I just want to give you some context and what's going to be going on relative to the areas immediately adjacent to the project. This is the, as I mentioned, this thing is divided up in different subject areas. So this is the what we'll call the Rutherford site, and this is the sort of the maintenance yard and employee parking, and then I call this the Upland Terrace area down farther to the north. And as I pointed out to you the last time we were here and got this approved, and also to the representatives of Hidden Oaks, there's going to be separate restoration areas, which is spelled out here, and then the shaded area fulfills an obligation to have additional native plants, which will be hydroseeded, non-irrigated hydroseeded. So when you see our plans relative to all the individual plants, those would be in addition to what's going to be going on here. And I just wanted to point that out. So, again, this has all been sort of worked out. There'll be individual plant materials, which are part of this document. But again, this document's already been approved by you and the city and the fire department, for that matter. So I want to point that out. Perhaps we could start with some of the areas on the north side. We can come back to these other ones, mostly because I know that they are of most concern to the neighbors, and here we are. And then we'll address some of the issues. So this is the Rutherford property. It's actually match line, so there's more units down here, but this is the cul-de-sac at the end of Torino, and the Hidden Oaks project is here. And these are individual properties at these locations, and this is the area that I felt was of most concern to the neighbors, and this is what I reviewed with them. Now, as I indicated to them, what's important to know is that the fire department has its own rules and regs relative to defensible space, and so we have to follow their direction in terms of the relative massings and their proximity to each other and the spacing between masses of shrubbery and that sort of thing. And so if the plant doesn't look thick and lush in some areas, that's the reason, really. So, but this is the plan that we reviewed with the fire department, and this is what they've signed off on. I would point out that all the material for these three, what I'll call the three upper areas, Rutherford and then the maintenance and what I'll call the upper terrace, it's all native. And as such, it'll be unique for that in that perspective. But the distribution of plant material is shown here. I'm sure Chris would want to go through it, but there's an issues with existing residents in terms there's an existing, I won't belabor this, but there's an existing oleander hedge which is near and dear to the folks who live down here, and that's going to be retained. Throughout the campus, there are enclosed patio areas that are indicated here with these little dashed lines. So this is the fencing, and then these hatched areas of the fence are the individual patios. I'm just going to point out, since we're talking about it now, but this is, it's detailed in the plans, but this is what the existing 5-foot board fence looks like around each of the patio areas. This is the detail that's most recent on the campus, and so we basically just copied that.
Okay.
Okay. So, that being said, this is the plan. There was a note about, in the comments about making sure that the trail that comes off of Torino would only come off at one location. I think we had another trail sort of joining up, but we've eliminated that. Remember, too, that all this area will be hydroseeded with that native plant hydroseed, low profile, so for fire protection. So here is the trail. We wanted to keep it kind of sort of loose and not very dense, and we talked about that at our meeting with the neighbors. And again, this will serve in the field at the time of construction. This will serve as a guideline, and we'll move these plant materials away, because I know that, for instance, the gal that lives here, she's not really wanting 3 oak trees right here, just because she wants a sort of a long view opportunity there. So
before you move on, I just wanted to point out a couple other things that happened at the September 6th hearing, which was we had met with the neighbors after that hearing and looked at ways to better screen this, because we were proposing a retaining wall, and then on top of the retaining wall was going to be a fence like that. We've now removed both the retaining wall and the fence, and what we've gone with is we've pushed these parking spaces 3 feet closer, so it has more of an opportunity to screen. So they just don't want to see it as they drive by, and they don't want to see, like, if there's a large delivery truck there, they don't want to see the van. So now we've created more of a location for the large berm, which would go in this area. And then we also have pushed this pad down by 3 feet, so it's less likely for them to see this building, which was a big concern of theirs. But that also gave us the opportunity to reduce the retaining walls that were happening in these locations here, which was one of the things that you'd requested, to either find planting for that area to soften those walls. What we chose instead was to reduce them.
And then speaking of the walls, and we'll point this out, and Mike can speak to this more specifically if you have questions, is my understanding is that the walls have been lowered, but in particular they've been terraced. So there's obviously a low wall here in front and then a higher wall behind. But none of these, from what I gather, exceeds maybe 4 or 5 feet.
Correct.
From finished grade up. So the fact that it's terraced and it won't be overwhelming size-wise, so I think that's a real plus for the project. Speaking of walls, the decision has been made to go with a sort of a split-face block for the walls, and not unlike. There we go.
But we did kind of a study, and if you look at where the walls are located, they're all hidden behind buildings. And so what we wanted to do is create a wall that didn't have a lot of maintenance, because these buildings are owned by the same owner, virtually forever. So we're being very aggressive with our plants in front of these walls, at a minimum 15 gallons with our ivy. What is it?
Well, no, the ficus pomelo. Yeah.
So we have looked at different options, and before I think we were going with a concrete block that was going to be plastered and painted. We don't have a problem with graffiti over here, so painting it is not that big of an issue. So what we looked at is what would be the nicest that is a concrete block. So we went with the split face. We looked at the slump stone, we looked at other options, but we like the split face because we're going to have plants growing up this. They will go on, and this is from the corporate office, the plants need to go up as soon as the walls are up. So that was one of the things that will need to be stated in the plans, so the contractors will follow that. But that's what we're looking at, is this is sandstone, to give you an idea that's what we tried to do. This color is not actually called sandstone. Sandstone is a much colder color. This is the Canyon Bluff, which is a special order color. It'll cost a little bit more, but we like the warmth, and we feel like it's much better for the color palette that we had. So these are some of the pilot. We're just kind of looking at how to reduce the feel of these walls with pilasters and caps, and we've gone with a cap that is similar and not in that color, but that design. And we just wanted to give you a visual of what it would look like. So that's what we've gone with. Okay. Actually, it's going to be a darker colored cap, so I can show you an example.
And all the walls get planted out with a ficus. It's really the only non-native plant here, but we felt like we wanted to green the walls up to make them a less obtrusive visually. So I'm going to show you just the areas. Well, this is the bottom of the Rutherford site. The plant palette is pretty self-explanatory. The treatment, as far as the disposition of native plant materials, is pretty much the same everywhere. You can see the walls. These are the configurations for the retaining walls in this area. Again, the materials and the plant materials of the ficus on the walls would be consistent throughout. And where am I? Oh, okay. Well, I wanted to show the other one up front. Hang on. Yeah, I'm going to show you all of our homes on the north side. Bear with me. Okay. So adjacent to what we'll call the Rutherford site is the maintenance building, and again, all native material, ficus growing up on the walls. These walls would be, what sort of height? About 8 feet. Yeah. Okay. These are the largest walls, I think, on the site. So, but we do plant them out, and again, here's another wall here. But again, this is all planted out. So, and this is not a location that would be seen by anybody other than the residents themselves. So, but we obviously want to make it as attractive as we could. And then this is what I call the upper terrace area, just down the street. And it's 4 units here, or actually, yeah. And again, the treatment's pretty much the same. We've got terrace walls here of the same height as Rutherford, 4 to 5 foot range, and fully planted out with plant material. In some cases, well, in the terraces, we're using sort of a low profile type of ceanothus that will provide some cascading effect on down the walls. So.
We've really worked hard, though, to get a planter in right in this location here.
Which we have not planted out there, but we will.
And also to kind of have this walkway as smooth as we possibly can have a couple landings and some pullouts for the carts, the little pedestrian carts.
Are you interested in the rest of the campus?
I'd go to the administration building.
Yes, that's the first sheet.
I think the
And then
administration building, because it's up in the front where the main entry is.
Yep.
Yeah, that kind of.
You can hold that for a second.
Sure.
The decision is made in terms of the type of fountain that would be appropriate here. I think the last time we were here, we showed this as a planter, and then the Valverde folks wanted to have a fountain there. So this is the fountain that's been chosen. It's actually detailed in the plans themselves, but this is sort of the look. Yes. And located here. I don't think we've made a final decision in terms of, there's some discussion the last time about what this material might be. As of now, it's scored concrete, probably colored, and we haven't decided what. But I think there's some adjustments to the grades that will have to be made here that might affect the way this lays out. But as far as the landscape is concerned, it's pretty much as we show it here. I will point out that we're trying to avoid the use of lawns in most cases. In parkways where it's sort of consistent and where we have issues of people wanting to get out and stuff. And we actually show lawns in various locations. Where we will use lawns, it'll be the UC Verde variety of buffalo grass, it uses like 25% of the water that conventional turf grasses uses. But we're sort of in discussion now with some of the representatives from corporate level and where we can just eliminate lawn altogether, which would be my approach. Then we're going to do that. So there'll probably end up being a lot less lawn as actually shown on these plans, but it still meets the less than 20% of the total project area in terms of the landscape. So all the shrub and ground cover areas, exclusive of whatever turf grass we have, will be done with drip. Sort of Netafim, sort of multiple layers of drip tubing. So I think that'll be a real big plus. The campus uses reclaimed water, but at the same time, there's energy involved with producing reclaimed water. So we felt it would be appropriate to go with drip, and it eliminates the opportunity for overspray on walkways and what have you, especially with reclaim. So we feel like the drip is really the best solution. That's what we're going with. Well, the rest of our drawings, we have complete irrigation. All the drip irrigation is designed. It's been designed in these sheets too. But the rest of it is just drawings for all the various parts of the campus that are going to be developed. These are all the new units, and you can see this from the architectural site plan. But this is obviously this area is being developed. Again, these lawn areas, while the water conservation people in the city don't really have a problem with using the UC Verde in place of no lawn. We'll probably eliminate a lot of these small lawn areas, but for now we're showing that. So here's the various areas. There's a key here, obviously, to show where on the campus each one of these areas is. But I'm just showing you these just in terms of the width and breadth of the work that we've done for this. But it's pretty complete. Again, these are sort of our typical irrigation plans. We use sort of a graphic hatch that's tied to all these here. So, and then again, the fencing and the fountain are part of this package as well. So, anything else we want to add?
I just want to show one of the questions last time was about campus lighting, and the campus lighting has been approved, and there was so much that was required as part of the DART and then prior to Planning Commission that the plans really haven't changed. These are the cut sheets that were approved. These are the photometrics have been done for these fixtures. These are the fixture locations. So the most part right now there is existing kind of the globe look from the 60s, and those will all be replaced with these are mostly for the parking lots. These replace the globes. This is more of an entry and then pathway. Is this right here? Okay. So we try to keep the lighting as low as possible where we can, and that's where. So it has not changed since the PC approved set of plans, and we've got all the locations, photometrics, the parking lot, and such.
I think that would pretty much conclude the landscape portion of the presentation.
Okay. We don't have any other high retaining walls next to sidewalks other than that area that was now alleviated by lowering the pad 3 feet. Okay.
Correct.
All right. Maybe we should just go on to the porch columns and details, the architectural details.
Okay.
Chris, if you have any other landscape, we'll come back to when in questions we could address those.
I'm going to go straight to the details.
Okay, I think what we were looking at was some of those porch columns and, you know, the bases for the columns and that sort of thing.
We've got a few different types. This is something you might see more in the back if you have a covered patio. Mm-hmm. And then we have, let me get my samples out. This is the window trim. We'll have it in 4x and 6x. It's a little beefier than what they used to have. And this right here is actually real stone. It's from the stone yard, and you just get an idea of it's just dry stack and has real nice earth tone colors that work well with our color palette.
Okay.
And also because it's dry stack, then you don't have that weird connection where you have the weep screed. It's hidden because of the dry stack. Let's see. So we've got the Turncraft product hiding our structural member, and we have one that's a straight column, one that's a tapered column, and then we've got some that are a little bit more stout on the bottom. We wanted to break it up because just like a neighborhood, you don't always have that same column. It's a little different. The column caps could be different. Our bases can be different. So that's what we've done, and it depending on the unit depends on which type of column it gets. Let's see. And we've really concentrated on what's happening with the connections and the details. Let's see, and how it all works in with our box beams and such. So we've added quite a few details. There was another request on the skylight, and so the skylight detail was changed, and there it is, to make it as low profile as possible. It used to be up in a 2x6 curb, and now we've really pushed it down. So those are the basic changes. We also, looking at the elevations, we wanted to get some different options for what's happening around the windows to break things up a little bit. Not too much, but so we have one that's flared and then one that's squared off, and then we've gone with one that just has the header that is flared. So it just breaks it up a little bit.
Okay. All right. Is that it, Justin?
That's
Your
it.
finishes and your colors.
The finishes and colors are the same as last time. I'll go to an elevation. So we have lighting specs, just they're exactly the same as you saw last time, and these are the finishes that we'll kind of play with throughout campus. This is the existing color of the existing units, and as remodels happen, we will try to incorporate a little bit more variety in the colors, the color schemes, which all will be tested. What we've decided to do is test it on, since the maintenance building is going to be torn down and it's far away from all the residents. We're going to test these colors because typically what we have is a note that says you need to do a 10-foot by 10-foot square of both the colors on a sample building so we can see how the light affects it. But these are the colors. We tried to have them enough of a variation but all in the warm kind of color palette. And some are, a little brighter than others, but those I consider them our 10%. because every neighborhood, if it's just all homogenized, it doesn't feel right. But if you throw in a couple, a little bit more interesting colors, and that 10%, and then it has a better feel to it. The colors are Sherman & Williams. A lot of them are the colors that were used on original Craftsman buildings in the 1900s. You can see by the numbers, if it's a Sherman Williams like 35, that was the 35th color that they started to produce in the early 1900s, or late. So those are the roof colors as well, and the gutters are painted gutters, just like the rest of the campus.
Okay. Thanks. With that, I'd like to open it up for public comment. I have one comment slip. Ruth Georgie. It's okay. Go ahead.
Good afternoon. My name is Ruth Georgi, and I am one of the neighbors to the north, as you commented about. And we did meet with Mr. Black, and we were very happy to have done that. We did come out of the meeting feeling much better than when we first walked into it, and especially the assurances that we would be able to come and talk to them in the final phases before the plants are actually put into the ground and stuff. You are the experts, especially Chris. I know as far as landscaping is concerned, I mean, after listening to the meetings for so long, there were a few things that stood out to us when we looked at the plans up in our neighborhood. And one of them Mr. Black did address, and that was the oak trees that are proposed right outside. And I've mentioned several times in this meeting and other meetings that we've attended that really that's my only view. I have a very large hill on one side of oaks. I have hills behind me. I have hills here. So this is my view. And this is where all my living part of my home is out towards Val Verde. So having the oaks proposed right there was a huge concern for me. He did say, okay, well, I can see the three. And I told him, I said, honestly, there may be more that I'm going to ask if you can just relocate a little further up the hill or something. Some of the native plants, and I'm happy to see that there are native plants being proposed, have the potential to get to 20 feet in height, I think, especially some of the shrubs on the list. And those were designed to go up right next to the fence line. So that was one of the concerns, and we hope that we can work with them and perhaps either keep them trimmed down. And I'm saying potential. I understand that plants don't always grow as high as they're thinking. Keep them trimmed down or something to where the actual height along the fence might be only a foot or so, maybe 2 above my fence line, which is at 6 feet. Just, again, to protect that view and not feel so closed in. And one of the other comments that we had coming out of there was the possibility of tiering the plant materials up towards the hill rather than having a lot of taller things towards the front. I understand you can't put tall trees next to the buildings, that's against code, but over near the where the wildlife trail is, keeping some of that a little lower and then gradually having the higher plants as it goes up the hill. Possibility, I don't know if it would look good, I don't know if it would end up looking right or not. And one of the last things we noticed and commented on, and I'm not sure that Mr. Black was aware of this, was that last year or the year before, 17 very large liquid ambers were removed from Val Verde, from the interior part of Val Verde. And mainly near where the new parking lots are going to be going in. And we're wondering if part of the replanting process is to replace those, because it has changed the look of the campus, in our opinion. Mm-hmm. And so we just wanted to make note of that and ask that you consider that also. So thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you. Having no other speakerships, I will close public comment, bring it back to the board for questions. Let's start with Paul.
No questions.
Keith?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess the only question would be, David, if you could address the neighbor's comment about the trees that were removed, and maybe you can just touch on what kind of materials taking its place.
Well, I'm not I'm not remembering exactly where those, we have a separate arborist report that speaks specifically to the trees that would be removed, and that's all been documented. All I can say is that wherever we have opportunities to plant new trees, we have, and I think that reflects itself in the plan. Not always, not necessarily liquid amber trees, but we do try to use a palette of trees that's consistent with what's on the campus now. So are we planting 17 new liquid amber trees? Probably not, but we certainly are planting more trees than are being removed overall.
Our planning commission conditions of approval require us to replant for the plants that are required, are protected, and so we will have to meet that condition of approval to get our building permit. So Peter Lawson will be checking that to make sure.
Right. Okay.
Thanks.
Dawn?
No question.
Gary?
I have a couple questions. One, on your cut sheet for your lighting fixtures, I noticed that there was an additional lighting fixtures for residential building 1. Did you not have that on the cut sheet on the lighting fixtures? It's one that just comes straight out.
Yeah, it's definitely the oddball on the sheet, and it's because it's hidden up underneath the eave, and it's only to illuminate the building sign. So in case of emergency, when the ambulance comes, it has a building number.
It's not on the side of the building. It's under the
right.
eaves?
It's under the eave, and so it illuminates the sign that's on the side.
Thank you. Another question I had was the window assembly color. What are you proposing for the window assemblies?
It is on the. It's anodized bronze.
It's an anodized bronze. Okay. Thank you. That's the question I had. And then the last question I have, and I'm not sure, I just wanted to ask this because of what happened at the airport project. Are you having any emergency generators, or are you having any areas that have equipment that are not located on the plan right now?
There are emergency generators already on site, and they're part of the skilled nursing facility. We're not planning to update those. They're already located in a surround.
Okay.
And they're going to stay there.
But there's nothing proposed in this project?
No.
Okay, thank you.
Chris?
How much time do we have? My eyes are kind of glazed over.
There's a lot of sheets.
Well, there's a lot to look at here in terms of landscape, and not a whole lot of time, but it looks like fairly thoroughly thought out. One of the questions, those liquid ambers, I was just thinking about your neighbor's comment here. That's one of the only trees that we get fall color from, and I'm sure for them it was a lovely time of year to see that. So I guess it'll be a comment, but I'll just be encouraging you to consider that loss, and
I will do that.
Yeah, and to address that. As far as the lawn goes, I am familiar with the UC Verde buffalo grass, which is a good choice for the lawn. We do have a rule that no lawn can be less than an 8-foot. So I don't know if that actually applies. That might be a question for staff. Is since we are using an alternative that's not so resource intensive, is that an acceptable substitute for?
Just a question: is that for only commercial projects or residential?
That is everything. Yeah. There's.
Does that include reclaimed water?
The rule basically states that you can't have any lawn dimension or section that's less than 8 feet in any one direction. So parkways would be eliminated. You wouldn't be able to use lawn in there. But in this case, it's a very drought tolerant and less resource intensive. So it's just something that hasn't been cleared up, I think, with the city. So anyway, that'll be something to look into for staff, I would say. One of the other questions I had was these interior patios that are fenced off. What's happening inside of those? Is that per tenant or?
Yes.
Okay, so they're basically allowed to do whatever they want.
Yeah, we try to create enough space around patios for tenant use.
Okay. Cool.
Own use.
All right. I guess that's really all I have for questions at this point. Like I said, it looks pretty thorough, so I'll keep on perusing.
Okay, thanks, Chris. Questions. I don't have any other questions. I think that I think Chris has covered the ones that I was thinking about. And I assume that you're continuing, just as you said, you're continuing this dialogue with your neighbor, so as you start to implement your planting and stuff like that,
I have
you
my
guys.
business card.
Okay. All right. So I'll bring it back to the board for comments. Paul.
No comments.
Keith.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think the applicants have done a great job responding to our comments. I think it's ready for final approval. I encourage you to continue the dialogue with the neighbors, as I'm sure you guys will, and not just in the design and implementation, but long-term for their maintenance concerns. But I think you guys have done a really good job.
Thanks. Don?
I agree with Keith.
Gary?
Yeah, I think it's great. I'm glad that you moved the additional trail off, and the removal of the fence was a good move. Dropping down the elevation of the building was something not expected at all, and I applaud that. I think it's ready for final approval. I did notice one thing, though, on the block walls, and this is really not my expertise, but I did notice that you were using Boston ivy on that, and that tends to be a die back and go away. And
Well, I think actually we're going to switch that out, because I actually like Boston ivy, the Parthenocissus, because I like the change in color, the red, but I'm thinking that maybe the residents wouldn't, so we're just going to make sure we'll go with the ficus, so it's always green. So
all right.
switch that out.
yeah, I think the project's ready to move on, and thanks for doing a really great job.
Thanks, Gary. Chris?
I wish we had a third option. It always seems to be Boston ivy or. But yeah, and I guess I like it. I like it too. I think it's something different. So maybe it's a matter of talking with the, the tenants, because if you have just the ficus everywhere, it's very plain and.
I've actually been known to mix the two.
Wow. Okay. I have a quick question going back. You mentioned something about the lawn. Some of the lawns might be eliminated, and are there changes in store for this? I mean, if it's hard to give final approval if we know things are going to change.
Well,
should we come back?
I guess. Yeah. Then we come back.
They're existing lawns that we're trying to work through the process of eliminating them, and so it's not as easy as David and I making the decision.
Got it.
We're sort of in process determining which lawns everyone would be okay with. But I would hope that you would see that as a positive thing. And that we could come back and present what ground covers we're going to use.
Okay. Well, I'd say if that's going to be the case, that you are planning to change those out, that we would ask you to come back. But other than that, I think the only other thing that wasn't quite defined was a few of the, like you said, materials for hardscape areas. So maybe those are a few of the things that should come back for consent.
This is final for the residential buildings, because we need to get going on our residential buildings into the building department, and also for grading. So if there's certain things that you want to come back, we can bring that back with the final of our commercial buildings, which will come back to this board as well. So please let us know. The important part for us is to move forward with getting the residential and the grading into the building department.
Okay, I think that makes sense, that maybe the landscape portion should come back if there are those changes that are going to be necessary.
Yes,
right.
Yes.
Changes the lawn. What else was I going to say? Yeah, I guess that's it. So I think it, like I said, looks well thought out, and I applaud the use of native plants pretty much throughout. I think that'll be a nice example of what can be done.
Thanks, Chris. Likewise, I think everybody summed it up pretty well. I like all the progress that you've made and how you've addressed all the questions, and especially those last moves that you guys made has been really progressive to do it in that way.
I applaud you for working with the neighbors and continuing to do so. I, like Chris, would ask you to give good consideration to the liquid ambers and what it does bring to the community. I, for one, really love seeing them around. I know that they're hell to clean up, but boy, they look great, and they just they add that other dimension, at this time of the year. And I think that you guys are really ready for a final here, and good job. So with that, we're ready and open for a motion. Again, the motion should just also include that, as Chris says, any of the landscape changes made will come back to the board for review.
On consent?
On consent, yeah.
Mr. Chair, I'll make that motion since this is for final approval as submitted. Applicant to return on consent with any changes or refinements to the landscape plan.
Thanks. Do I have a second? Second by Gary. All those in favor, or any under discussion?
Identification of certain hardscape materials. Is it just this one section, the entry?
It's just that area that
Would you like to put that on, Chris?
Well, if they're not coming back, then there's a chance they won't come back. And I think it'll be fine.
we're going to come back with something, because I can already see that when we have the truncated domes and we start to put those there where we're required to, and you're going to want to see what the color of that is in relationship to the color of the pavement. That has to be 70% of contrast, but needs to work. So I can see that we'll have to do, when we're in the building department, that'll come up. We'll need to do some refinements.
Okay.
So under the motion, we'd probably like to ask if there's any changes, not only to the landscape but to the hardscape, that would come back on consent.
Yeah, why don't we say that definition of the paving materials and colors in the common building area will return to consent.
That's good. Great, thanks. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Against, that motion carries. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
All done. That brings us to the last item of the evening, 101 North Salina Street. I wonder if I've been on this one.
Just move it to the north.
I like the tracer.
So that we don't have to.
Yeah, actually, whatever. Got some of the part when leaves come back. Product reps mentioned.
I agree.
Yeah, that sounds fun.
Can you share while a second?
Hi there. This is our last item of the agenda, 101 North Salinas. Do we have minutes, Tony, from the last meeting?
There is a slip coming up.
Thank you. Let's see. The last time we saw this, we gave the project an indefinite continuance back to the full board with the following comments. Number one, the proposed zoning modifications pose no negative aesthetic impacts. 2, provide a site plan showing neighboring structures and adjacent window locations. 3, provide context photos of adjacent buildings and the surrounding neighborhood. 4, show tree locations on the site plan, including existing, proposed, and any to be removed. 5, show accurate setbacks on the site plan. 6, restudy the orientation of the second floor unit with an entry that addresses the street. And 7, composite elevations showing both buildings. Your name for the record.
Okay. My name is Bree Medley. I am the agent for the owner, Jennifer Cecchio. So we have just come back with all of those changes.
Okay. Let's just go through them.
Okay. So in regards to the surrounding buildings, there's two buildings that directly are related to the project itself. The first building is this building right here, the apartment complex off of Selena Street, and tried to get them as accurately as possible for you guys. It's kind of difficult to see. I'll give you guys this as well. There are windows along this wall, but they don't really come down. The only window that will have any connection to the new building itself, is down towards the end. There is a fence back here, and you can see...
this window?
Yes, it's that window right here. There's the fence that is existing currently right there. The opening actually in that fence is right here. And then this building as well has an adjacent relationship to the building as well, but as you can see here, the windows are further back on that property line. So we're trying we wouldn't really be blocking anybody's views. They're pretty much looking into this parking lot right now. With that being said, I think this is a good segue into discussing planting. I apologize, it didn't show up on that, but we are proposing, there's currently on site an existing avocado tree that conflicts with the footprint that we are proposing, and then there's a ficus tree that's just kind of in the middle of nowhere. What we're planning on doing is having some very simple vegetation in the open space, but also incorporating some citrus trees along the back fence line that will add to both the privacy between the garage and upstairs unit, as well as the neighbor towards the north. It's really pretty minimal landscaping. It's going to be residential landscaping. We haven't gone too much further because we'd like to go through the show process before we go too crazy in depth with everything. Another of the comments that we've discussed is changing the orientation of the second floor residential unit so that there was a way of having an addressed entrance from Mason Street. So we've flipped the stairs from the northwestern side over to the northeastern side so that you do actually have that being addressed. Let me go to the elevation so you can see that. So from the street side, you do see the entry stairs. The elevations have stayed fairly similar to what they were before, but when you are looking, you do see an entrance instead of it being back behind where you can't see any way of addressing it. From a composite standpoint, as you can see, the grade itself slopes and the building heights are pretty simple, although we do have a one-story main residence. Because of the slope, the second story doesn't become overwhelming in comparison. Gives the relationship. We will be putting in more landscaping and whatnot as this goes through the process, but we're just at the point where we need to see whether or not we can get through these zoning modifications.
Thanks. Thanks, Mary. So with that, we have one public comments slip. Beth Jones, if you'd like to come forward, and you can use this microphone.
We own the property that you have the picture of, the 105, and I think she has very nicely addressed the concerns that I had about the windows last time, and I didn't catch the name of the trees or that you're putting in on the side.
We're looking at citrus trees, so they're not going to be very big trees, but because there's not a ton of space, but it still will create sort of a green buffer to some extent. It will, I mean, I don't think they're going to be getting really, really big, but there still will be a privacy buffer that it does create to an extent.
Okay. So I think that was our issue, and we just were here interested, and thank you very much for taking care of it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
With that, I'll close public comment, bring it back to the board for questions. Paul?
I have one question. Can you refer refresh my memory what the mods were for?
We have 3 mods that we're requesting. One is an open yard area reduction. We currently have a little over 1,100 square feet in between the 2 buildings. However, there's a ton more, but just due to the fact that we have a double front yard setback, we're minimized associated with how much we can achieve from an open yard standpoint. The second is a parking modification. We're providing, what there is currently on site is 1 carport, and with the new density associated with the second residential unit, it's required that we have 2 covered and 2 uncovered spots. What we're proposing is 2 covered, 1 uncovered. We've already met with transportation a number of times, and they can support that density. And then the third is we are doing a basement remodel that is within the front yard setback. It's within the existing main residence. So those are the 3 modifications that we're applying for.
And then just to refresh my memory, the back of the garage is 8 feet from the property line, or 8'6"?
8'6".
And the setback in that area is 6 feet?
That's correct.
And why did you come up with 8'6" versus 6
Solar.
feet? I follow you now. Okay. Those are my questions. Thank you.
Great. Keith? Don?
No questions.
Gary?
I have one question. Be for staff. The area is in a flood zone. At least it says it is, and they're adding more basement area to it. They're bringing the basement down. Is that going to be an issue, or is that?
I don't know. That'd be a question for building safety.
Because it would make a difference on this project.
I have talked with Public Works about this, and they, due to the fact that it is already a basement and we'd be putting in additional drainage so that there wasn't any issues, they didn't see that it would be something that would cause it to be a problem. But that was just, it was an initial review with them prior to them being able to make any actual decisions.
Thanks, Gary. Chris?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm trying to get a feel for the extent of the driveway, and it looks like it's most of that southwest corner.
It is.
And is that pretty accurate in the...
It is most of it. Transportation had requested that we increase the apron for turnaround purposes, and then we have in this area right here, that's the new uncovered parking right through there. So currently, this portion right in here is actually paved, so we would be increasing the paving right in here.
So basically that whole corner of the property would be concrete?
Yes, and right now a good portion of it is actually asphalt.
Mm-hmm.
What we will be doing, however, is removing all of the paving that is right in here. So what we're doing is we're really kind of condensing it all into one area instead of having it be split up, creating a more uniform yard area, because right now it's very much broken up. They're the 2 different driveways.
Okay. That's all I have for questions then.
Sorry, Gary? Oh, we had it already? Yeah. Okay, I have no questions. I think everyone asked the questions, and we're here for concept review, so comments? Paul?
Sorry.
It's okay. Take it in.
I think the project's a fine project. I'm looking at ways of how you can actually make the upstairs bedroom a little bit larger, and that would be encroaching in that 8.5 feet, but it has to do with your solar setback, so I'm looking at your grades, if there's any way that you can gain a little bit more width in that bedroom, but that's having not to do with your mods. The mods seem straightforward. If you've done your homework and staff will support them, then I see that it's a beneficial project for the community.
Great. Keith?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I think you're ready to go on to show. I think down the road we'll want to scrutinize the paving and how that's done and broken up and hopefully permeable. And then architecturally, just the kind of integration of that, excuse me, that deck area, so it's kind of doesn't feel like a spindly sort of add-on to the existing house, but otherwise, yeah, I think you're doing fine.
Thanks, Keith. Don?
Yeah, I think you're ready to go to the modification hearing. And is the deck area you were talking about the landing of the stairs or a different deck? Oh, the deck on the main house? Oh, okay. My only comment on the new structure would be a way to maybe provide some detailing where that landing cantilever's out. It just looks like a little piece of plaster, and if you could bring that wall down and have a reveal for the lower level door or something like that, might look better instead of it.
I think we'll probably address
something like that. That's it.
Thanks. Larry?
Yeah, I think the modifications are technical in nature because of the two setbacks. I think there's lots of open yard space. So I think this project's ready to move forward. Out of my own feeling, I would go to building and safety and ask them about the flood control thing to make sure that you have a viable project. But either way, it's okay with them.
Thanks. Chris? Thanks, Gary.
Yeah, I agree with what's been said. Also, the main thing for me is that driveway, just how big it is, and we'll want to find a way to soften the structure that is so obviously seen from the road, and maybe hopefully find a way to shrink that apron up a little bit. And then I'm also curious to see what happens. I guess it's off property, but in the right of way, it's sort of a big space there. I don't know what the intent is, to just leave it weeds or.
No, I think it's one of those things that we'll probably have to address as it goes on. I think that's going to also be something that goes along with sort of phasing of what she does from a landscape standpoint, because that whole area is not maintained.
Yeah, well, it's sort of a good opportunity to spruce up the neighborhood a little bit too. But that's it for me.
Thanks, Chris. I feel likewise. I think the mods have no aesthetic impact, and I think that you squeeze a good project out of what you have, and I like the idea of combining. I do want to just support Chris in that any opportunities we can have to make the seam smaller, be it I like the fact that there's overhanging tree here, so it casts all that shadow and it kind of helps that. So it's little things like that I think could help. That's about it. I think you're ready to move on to the next process. And with that, I'm open for a motion. You allow her to. This would be concept review, allowing you to go on to SHO. Or
You guys are just. So this would be indefinite continuance to the staff hearing officer. The board supports the project design and looks forward to its further development. And in particular, the board will be scrutinizing the design of the paving and landscape area in its vicinity, and the architectural detailing and articulation of the second floor porch and landing elements.
Great. Do I have a second?
Can you make some specific comments on the aesthetics regarding the mod requests?
Okay. As the board indicated last time, the board feels that the modifications requested have no aesthetic impact on the project.
Great. Second by Dawn. Under discussion? We're all good? So all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Against? That motion carries. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And with that, that brings us to the end of the agenda for this evening. Of the year.
I like the last one.
I'd like to
of the year.
Thank you all for tuning in. Good night, Santa Barbara. Merry Christmas and good luck.